with Nick. So just some background, I know Nick for many years, and most certainly in my business, some of his insights around strategy has worked extremely well for me. Very tangible, very practical, easy to implement. And he built up, as you saw from his bio, a business school in South Africa, which has become the leading business school in our country. And I think it offers, in my opinion, most certainly, one of the best MBA programs in the country. So I'm going to hand over to Nick, and he's just going to take us through some thoughts around our businesses in this current climate, and also how we can apply certain things, because I think the way we operate our businesses is going to be in a very, very different environment going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick. You're on mute,
Can
Nick.
you hear me? Can you hear me?
There you are. There
Lovely.
you are.
Thanks so much, Eleanor, for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me just to share a few thoughts with you. I thought I'd lay out a few lines of thinking, and then maybe we can open up to some discussion. I was thinking about the imagery of where we are in this COVID time, and the sort of strange thing that all the businesses I talk to, there's a mix of three things going on. The first is, what have you built up over time in terms of products and services, but also in terms of skills and capabilities and energy levels and so on, resources, that are still going to be equally valid now. Because we've been flung into generally, I was looking at the tremendous diversity of people and businesses in this discussion. We've been flung into a frontier, an unknown world, a fog of some kind. And so the first question is, what about what got you into the room, in other words, to this point, but pre-COVID, is still relevant? And that's a very difficult question, because a lot of it is not relevant, and there are new relevancies which I will come to. The second is, what should you stop doing? And what have you stopped doing? And obviously attached to that is, in what practical way has your world changed, either inside your business, which is a very interesting area, or outside the business in terms of the markets and your rivals and the broader economy. And then the third question really is, what should you start doing? And I was thinking about this as an image, and thinking of going to the Kruger National Park. If you think about the park, most of us sort of go there, drive through, we may stay over. But if you think about the park from a strategic and operational point of view, if you've been a number of times, you'll know the north is very different than the south, the east from the west, that the river courses really matter. In other words, those parts of the economy that laid down the lines of whether it's ICT or mining or banking are still there. They're the main resource, the way our economy is structured. If you think about the rainfall and the seasonality of the park, that's extraordinarily important to understand. And then if you think about the ecosystem, from the big elephants down to the dung beetle, you get an immense variety of creatures and flora and so on at work. Partly climatically related. So if you just think of that image of Darwin's kind of environment, full of change, everyone trying to eat everybody else, everyone looking for the niche, for that space in which they can operate most successfully, and having to adapt to the short-term environment, as animals have to adapt to drought or flood, and so on and so on. So I thought I'd start with that image. There are three things you are probably pondering. One, and I'm going to come to the difficulty of this, is what can you take with you that still works? Secondly, what should you stop doing, or what have you stopped doing, and why, and was that a good choice? And then thirdly, what are the things you've started doing? because the environment is different. So I'm going to give you another image, and I'm going to talk a bit about strategy. So the second image that I often think about is a lock and a key. If you think about a Yale lock and a key, what you know is that that key only fits a lock. In other words, that way of positioning your business as what it can do will open the market if it has the right combination. And if you think about the key, it's specifically designed to fit in that Darwinian sense of survival of the fittest. Well, a key is a form of fitness. It's a static form of fitness, and it goes into that tube on the lock and it turns, and if it's aligned properly, in other words, if it creates value under changing conditions, then you're in business. If you can have a key and you can have lots of locks, but if the key doesn't fit the lock, you're probably not going to maximize your performance. And so what I've been thinking about in these last few months is that, you know, I grew up with Yale locks on gates or doors, or union locks in doors. But actually, the idea of what a lock is, in other words, a form of isolation or protection or whatever it is, has changed. And so we've gone from Yale locks to, I remember as a youngster having to remember combination numbers. You no longer needed a key. So you had to learn out the mechanical combination. Then you went to a digital pad where you had to put in a code, and there was an electromechanical device that sent a signal that released the lock. And then we ended up with fingerprints, because every human has a different fingerprint for access, so they say. And when I arrived in Dubai a few years ago, they read my iris, my eyeball. And every human has a unique eyeball, and that was the means of access. So what I'm trying to say with that point is that the nature of locks, the nature of functionality in a business is constantly changing. So let me just summarize those three thoughts. Firstly, how you've got into the room, and what you're doing in the room is not how you're going to get out of the room in COVID times. However, bearing in mind the immense variety of species and terrains in the Kruger Park. So it really depends where you are. Some businesses have not been much affected. Some have been beneficially affected. Some have been damaged but not wiped out. And some have been truly traumatized by what has happened. So given the list of companies that are in the room, I can't deal with specifics, but there's a lot of variety of industries, and I'm sure you've all got different stories and you're all different stages of development. So let's talk a bit about that. So three basic concepts. The environment, all strategy starts in the market, or should. Occasionally you, entrepreneurs especially, are inventive enough to shape the environment through a new product or service. And maybe many of you are in that category. That's quite unusual, because most companies are maintenance. They're largely operational and about maintenance. But if you have figured out some unique product service that really creates value, then you can shape the environment. But most of us have to read, listen, experience, understand the specifics of our lock, and bring that into the business as you build up your capabilities and organizational culture and structure and systems. So what is strategy? Strategy is about the pattern of choices that we make because we have better insight, that's a now thing, or foresight, that's a next thing, than our competitors. So a business that understands its market, builds capabilities and resources, these are basic principles, that have insight, that you can see better and understand better because you really understand the point of impact. In big companies now, the work I'm doing is they don't have that insight. They don't have what the Germans call a Fingerspitzengefühl, the feeling in the tip of their fingers. They become bureaucracies, and they become several steps removed from where the real learning is, which is at the point of delivery. And even in a small business, quite often it's easy to get sucked in the admin and sucked into all the other things that you've got to do. In COVID times, you've got to make sure that you're spending enough time right at the front line of the battle. And the front line of the battle is the joy or otherwise of the use of your products or services. And most entrepreneurs I work with are very well aware of that. The problem for them is they've got a laser-like focus on the kind of a lock, and then the environment changes and they struggle to shift the lock. That's if they've got past the gate and they really have something to offer. I'll talk a bit later, I think, about organizations and strategy. But I wanted just to introduce those general remarks. And obviously, all of us as leaders in this new environment need a map and a mirror. The map is for where are you exactly in the Kruger, to use that analogy, and where you're trying to get to in the Kruger. In other words, what are the next steps in the next 90 days, in the next year? And my assumption is we'll be under these conditions for quite a long time. So we are in a new normal, as people say. It doesn't feel normal, but it's a new normal. And we're all settling in and adjusting, and that's where the fight is taking place. Certain parameters in most sectors have now been established. And so I think it's going to be with us. It'll change shape, but this is going to be with us for a long time. I don't think we understand the disease. We're all dealing with a second wave. This could still build into a much bigger disaster than we've seen so far. So as you know, we're now the fourth, I think, highest number of infections, but with a relatively low mortality rate so far. And of course, we're having major damage to the economy, job losses, income, isolation, people changing their patterns of expenditure. All of those are probably affecting all of you in different ways. So the task of a leader is to have a good map. And what we put on a map is the information we need. I'm not thinking of a static map that you go and buy at a garage or use on Google Maps. I'm thinking of you trying to get from A to B, your strategy, and you better have the right information about the route and what obstacles or what panoramas or what fantastic things are waiting for you as you make the journey. And you better settle a bit on the longer term, although I must say, in my own thinking, I'm kind of thinking 90-day stuff. A lot of what we've got to do is quite operational. It may be cutting costs, changing the portfolio, reorganizing the decision process, changing IT systems and accounting systems. And the big thing is Intel. Have you got a really good system, formal or informal, of getting you the latest information in real time about what's happening in the point of contact and how people are using and absorbing what it is you offer? So, Eleanor, those are some introductory remarks, and I thought it'd be best if I take one or two questions, if you can manage that for me, about what would help us discuss it. And let's take three at a time, if that's okay. They can post them, I think. Let me just make sure. I'm afraid I'm handicapped to my phone at the moment. I had my computer was relieved from me. So if you want to post some questions, I can see the chat now. And maybe I'll take a few at a time. Or you can come online and unmute and say them if you like.
Okay, no problem. Can I just ask you, Nick, on your phone, if you could just perhaps mute your phone? Just
I should mute it.
Yeah, because we're just hearing all the notifications coming through on your phone. So if you could just do that. Now we can't hear you.
I'm just getting rid of the notification, sorry. My laptop was relieved from me last week, so I'm in a sort of startup mode. So I'm trying to just turn it off.
Cool. I think, do we have any questions, guys? I think I have put on the chat there that we can post some questions through there. But if anyone would like to kick us off with a question for Nick.
So jump in, guys. Don't wait. Let's use the time.
Okay. I see we've got one from Graham.
Yep.
And it says that, can you see the question there,
the
Nick?
mirror.
The mirror and the
I
map.
didn't talk about the mirror. So map is what I described. The mirror is just the ongoing self-reflection that you must make sure that you're able to do objectively and subjectively. In other words, as a leader of a business, and your passion for the business will sometimes blind your objectivity. Probably that's more of a problem in smaller companies or startups than the other way around, where your objectivity dulls your passion. But you want to be looking in that mirror and making sure that you're dealing with the reality of the situation. Entrepreneurs are driven by hope, and hope is not a method. So you want a degree of objectivity, and that's where feedback from people who really understand your business, i.e. customers, or others who you know, and to keep talking and laying out the narrative. Let me share another little simple framework. I want to keep it very simple. There are 4 lenses through which to look at strategy, and then I'll come to the other questions. The first is simple rivalry. It's like boxing or chess. You're slugging it out. It's A against B or C, and it's the survival of the toughest and the strongest and the smartest and so on. It's capitalism's origins are about that. You are free to compete. The second lens through which I like to look at strategy is innovation. And you've got to ask yourself, what's your IQ in your business? And that's back to what I was saying earlier. What can you take from the past? What do you need to stop doing? And what should you do that's new? What's your innovation quotient? Because you may have to innovate significantly, which is tough when you're not getting the turnover that you might have expected. The third lens is standards or excellence. A leader of a business sets the standards, especially in smaller companies, through their direct personal behavior. And that's why you also need the mirror for a bit of counseling and coaching. How's your behavior changing? How are you managing remotely? How would you describe your style? How are you engaging with people? You know, I'm working with people I know mainly. I know Eleanor. But if you're working with people that you are engaging with and you've never met them physically, it's a different psychological dynamic than knowing someone over a period of time. So think about how you set standards in the business, standards of service. I bought a car last week, and I've spent a lot of time in Asia. And Peter Swanepoel deserves a giant kick in the posterior, because he sold me a car. He didn't disclose some of the faults as a used car, and it's taken a week and no communication whatsoever, no after-sale service. And I'm sure he's not got much to do. So you as the entrepreneur have to set the standard. When I started Gibbs, people used to ask, why am I so obsessed about light bulbs and litter? And the two were, for me, if you're arriving at Gibbs for the first time, if there were a light bulb's not working, it was an indication of operational excellence or not. And litter was a sign that we're not doing the maintenance. So I was obsessed by some detail, and all good entrepreneurs are obsessed by some detail, not excessively, but some detail. And so standards that you set by your daily behavior, especially now when we're all under pressure, is absolutely vital. Your standards of performance, of delivery, of sticking to your word, of all of those things, your values are on display under this kind of pressure. So it's a rivalry, innovation, standards, and then the last one is purpose. In talking and doing research about managing digitally, it's so important that we're able as leaders to articulate our energy, open ourselves up to doubts and questions and so on, but that you are able to keep working on the why. Very often when we're under pressure, we focus on the what and the how of delivery. But the why we run the business, the purpose of this business, its philosophy is a hugely important thing. When I started Gibbs, people enrolled into something that was about the country, not about a business school, more than a business school. So if you can define what you're doing in that way, that because most work is voluntary. And I was teaching last week, and I could tell some of the online students were doing other things while we were doing the session. So they're able to drift off and work in different ways. And our job as leaders is to make sure that they are delivering. Not that you're driving them into the ground, but you've got them on point. And so that's a very important part of motivation. All work is voluntary. Really, if you want people to work at 120% now because we're going to survive all of this and prosper, You've got to have the skill to manage that way. So no, I just wanted to share that next model and then just see what else is on the chat quickly. I know there was a...
So there's a next question from Leanne.
I saw, I've got it, yeah.
Yeah.
About government.
What are some of the best ways to ensure that you have the best intel? So get to the government question now.
Oh, there. First is what are you measuring? And you've got to measure the closest to the line of delivery that you can. As much with your personal eyeballs, as much as you can start building crude systems, measuring cash flow, following up with clients and testing their satisfaction level. You've got to be at the point of sale if you can. Your business is so varied that I can't articulate that for everybody, but you've got to be at the point of the battlefield. That's where things get determined. Ex-customers, people who stop being customers, you have to hunt them down and talk to them to learn the intel of why they would choose someone else and not you. Most of our market research is why you're with us. The best market research is a target customer not with you, and to talk to them and have that flow of information. So that's the best way to do it. You do it through experience. You put aside a huge amount of time, as much as you can, to make sure you're talking to the people delivering the product or the system delivering the product, and that you're getting the feedback as live as you can. Mm-hmm. How would you implement a system to get a sense of the customer experience at the delivery level? I think I've tried to answer that. Be the product or the service you offer. Robbie Brosen, I've known for many, many years. He is a chicken. He understands everything about a chicken. I even suggested to him many years ago that he should think about beef burgers, and he nearly shot me. The entire business is focused on total sensitivity to every aspect of being in the chicken business. So go and do frontline work. If you're in a business that you're not spending a lot of your time doing frontline work, make sure you are. That's where the reality is. The question from JP about government resolving issues, no, I don't expect so. I think it's a terrible weakness we've got. Firstly, we've got a very big corporate environment, which has served us in one way, but we don't have a vital enough SME sector, although we've got many successful small companies, but as a proportion of the economy, it's insufficient, and government doesn't really understand enterprise. So, and the government is so slow and bureaucratic at sorting out regulations, even in the COVID time, full of contradictions. And that's where you've got to pay some attention. And that's why belonging to groups like EO will really help you understand some of that. Right, shall I go to the next one, Eleanor?
Yeah. The digital
in a small business, do you have any suggestions spending time? Yeah, look, I obviously have switched. I'm a strategist, but I've switched to operations because the macro environment, the platform, the fundamentals are not reliable anymore. And so the nature of the operations becomes more and more important. Things, as I mentioned, are you looking at turning over every penny of cost and making sure for every rand you spend, you are creating value for the client and for you? Are you engaged in this joy of use or lack of joy, as I experienced last week? I would spend less time on strategy. I would have a 90-day plan and really work on execution, on getting it right, on follow through, on getting feedback, on measuring operational performance of people. I'll tell you an interesting story. I once, many, many years ago, I was teaching a case study with a colleague, and his case was about a textile business in Cape Town. And this was many, many years ago. And the company described how it measured performance, which was that every 15 minutes, people had to report their output. So at the bottom level, every 15 minutes, they reported to their boss. Every 15 minutes, those bosses reported to their bosses, and so on up the 6 levels of the company. And then in the background of the case study, it said he was German and had come after the war. And so someone chirped up and said, this guy clearly is a bad fellow. He's probably an escaped Nazi. At which point he put up his hand at the back of the class and explained that He ran 2 textile businesses, and he'd moved one to Port Elizabeth, and 95% of the people went with him. And the debate was this measurement system. You must manage what you measure, whether it's informal or formal. And that's where we are right now, is to make sure that the team is really focused on winning the match. We'll worry about the rules of FIFA later. We'll worry about where the World Rugby Cup will be next time. Right now, we're in Japan, and we're in the final. So I would switch a bit of my time more to operational excellence. Is it best to pick a lens? No, have multiple lenses. Don't ever rely on looking at anything from one angle. That's why I painted the picture of the locks, because the world doesn't need your permission to change. And if you're only looking through laser-like angles, you won't really see, you'll miss the change. And you want to be very careful, because in this environment, things will switch quickly. There's a lot of fraud going on. So a friend of mine is an entrepreneur. He's got 3 or 4 little businesses. And he was telling me yesterday of the multiple attempts at fraud in supply of PPE. 5 out of 6 suppliers. He's a friend. He's got a lot of experience. He can check out. And there's a massive amount of fraud going on. So be very, very vigilant about that.
I think a question from my side, Nick, you mentioned that, and I can see that you've done it. What are some of the key ingredients for us to shape our environment as entrepreneurs?
Well, as smaller businesses, you can only shape the microenvironment. Because as that one question said, government's blundering around in terms of SMEs. Think about what's in front of you. I would shape my microenvironment, grow the pot plants, make sure the kitchen's clean and functioning, and the food that is coming out of good quality. Make sure you have good customers. So that's a very interesting thing, is what is a good customer? And the first point about a good customer is someone you add significant value to because your key fits their lock. So it's being on top of that kind of stuff. It's the microenvironment. With employees, hugely important. Everybody's disturbed. Everybody's gone into Alice in Wonderland. We've gone through the cupboard into Wonderland. All of us, whether we admit it or not, is we're in another space now. We're working differently. We're working from home so often. We're dealing with family and social issues and children and education. Glaring at CNN, wondering what the hell's going to happen to the curve. Our lives have been turned literally in Alice in Wonderland upside down. There's a great thing called the Red Queen effect from Alice in Wonderland. Alice is running next to the Red Queen, and the Queen turns to Alice and she says to her, in your place, when you run fast, you expect to move. And the reply is, no, you run faster and faster, but you stay in the same place. So Eleanor knows I use the analogy of running up a down escalator. You're not in charge of the change. The escalator's in charge of the change. And you'll either run fast enough to get to the top, or you'll stay in the same place, working just as hard as you are now, or you will run slower than the escalator and the security guard will get you. So you've got to ask some really fundamental questions of, are you in the right business? And should you pivot your business model away? Just look at how restaurants are trying to eke out a living, becoming delis. My favorite restaurant, Pronto, offers me bolognese in a frozen plastic container, as opposed to sitting down for 2 hours. So you've got to pivot. If you've got to pivot, you've got to pivot. And if you're facing the edge of a cliff, just accept it's the end of a cliff and retreat. Retreat is a good strategy when you're in big trouble. I once drove into a swamp in Botswana in my Land Rover and kept going. It was a very big mistake. I should have got reversed out quickly. So this agility becomes really, really, it's a kind of intellectual and operational. It's an intellectual and emotional agility. The resilience to change your mind based on the evidence, and then the ability to do something about it quickly is hugely important. In the early days of Gibbs, I'll never forget going down the corridor about 3 months after we opened. And I went into an administrator's office and I said, this thing you're doing, I think you should do it that way. And she looked up from her desk after 3 months. She said, but we've always done it this way. This was 3 months after opening the doors. Her mind was like concrete, and I had to instruct her to change it. But in her mind, she'd always done it. For 3 months, she'd done it that way. So this happens in organizations, and you've got to fire up the teams. You've got to get them, the fresh start of all of this is to understand that no one has a right to a job. Everyone has a role, but that role is not a question of some structure. It's a question of adding value. Now, very often as owners, we get that because that's where the buck stops. But employees don't get it. Now, you can't beat them with it. I remember a lovely quote that said, the beatings will continue until the morale improves. That's not the approach. But getting the positive message across of we're all working in a team here for each other's survival and prosperity. And we need you. Getting the emotional contract going is hugely important. We need each other. South Africans haven't figured this out generally, but in every business of the size I suspect is on the list, I would say people really have to know that they need each other. And employees are nervous. And of course, there are different kinds of psychological reactions to change. Some is just be overwhelmed and paralyzed. Some is to be captured by fear. Some is by resentment. If you read the 5 stages of the denial of death, you'll pick them all up there. People get frozen in place. They may get lazy. They may try and stop working. I was talking to a doctor this morning who treated a government patient who hasn't worked for 3 months. So she says, because they haven't given me a computer to work at home. And the doctor said, but don't you have a computer? And she said, yes, but I haven't told them. Now, in North Korea, that's the firing squad. So we tolerate poor performance way too often, but you can't beat it into them. That's why I talk about purposes so much.
We've got a question there from Gideon. Can you see that from Gideon?
Yep, I'm sure I can. I just got to get to the chat room. Right, let's have a look. The point you made about having your leaders on point. Yep, remote. Yeah, look, I'm not an expert. I've hugely increased my technological knowledge from 1 out of 100 to 4 out of 100. So I'm a learner, which is wonderful actually, because I've learned so many things that I didn't know were within my reach, and they were there before, which was very embarrassing as a professor. But there are fantastic technologies. I don't have really practical tips. Let me just share 1 or 2 thoughts that people have shared with me. First is you've got to get them and yourself to manage your time reasonably. Now, I don't know what reasonably is. In South Korea, when I visited there the first time, they worked 6.5 days a week, and they cut back to 6 days a week. And my pal said to me, that's the end of South Korea. Well, he was wrong. But I mean, the work rate is just unbelievable. And I'm working long hours. Secondly, it is to make sure that they are enrolled, and I've talked about that enough. Socialize a bit. Get people to tell a story. I remember one company I used to go and work to once a month on a Friday. They'd have a beer, and then the execs would sit around the table, and the CEO said, right, who made the biggest stuff up this week? And the executives used to compete, believe it or not. No, we did this or we did that, and they'd all compete, and they'd all vote on which was the biggest stuff up they'd made, and then that guy would have to drink a beer. And the deal was surface the errors. Because if people are burying the errors, like my car salesman friend, out them. On the other hand, find out what they've done well that week. What's the best thing about your week? And share that. Use those sort of more social ways of doing it that get people to talk. Your teams. So the personalities of everybody in the main, because you've been physically near them, and you should know them. So make sure that you allow some steam off letting and some fun, whether it's pub quizzes or singing a song or telling jokes or having a drink. Dinner parties are much cheaper these days. You all make your own food. But do that. Don't neglect the social side. And then if you think there are people in trouble, reach out to them And if they need it, supply them some kind of independent support, because a lot of people are under a lot of pressure, either financially or family pressure, and life's tough having kids running around the house all day. So think a little bit about that.
And then I think the next question from Gilan, if you can deal with that.
Is that the one about the actionable?
How would you summarize into a few actionable points your advice for leaders on how to lead through this crisis?
Yeah. So number one for me is, do you really understand the nature of the battle? Because it's not the one you fought before COVID, most likely. And that to me is the main headline. Do you understand the reality of what is happening to your business? And how do you understand it? How much is objective? How much is subjective? How much are you personally uncovering and learning? To me, that's the overarching headline. Focus on operations, I think, is the second point I would make. And be sure that you understand the people in your team or the teams well enough to be able to lead them, not manage them only, but lead them. And set your own standard. But do it, be careful you're not overdriving. Because the car, if you over rev the engine, it'll eventually blow up. So make sure you're not over revving, but make sure you're stretching them and doing that in as supportive a way as possible. The last practical point is celebrate your wins. Over celebrate your wins. Pay attention to the messes that get made and learn from them, as I suggested. If you've got a good culture, people will surface their errors. If you've got a bad culture, they'll bury them. And in most South African companies, there's too much top-down sort of power. Make sure you let go a bit and you praise people and listen. I had a very clever boss who once said to me, "What if you're talking to someone who has a function and you're the CEO, 7 of the 10 things they tell you, you should know already. But a couple of them you won't. And you have to be patient enough to get that information. So you've got to listen through the chatter to get the insights." As a leader at Gibbs, I was very conscious of walking around. I used to patrol that campus, into the kitchens, talking to security, chatting to reception, going to people's offices, because I could see how the engine was running. And you can say hi to someone and see in their eyes if they're on point. So I spent a lot of my energy and time in sort of random engagements. Do that. Don't just make it formalized, and cut back on Zoom. So a meeting is the lowest form of work. So cut back on Zoom, and you prepare well. The success of any meeting is preparation. And think about the types of meetings. Is it a feedback? Is it a decision-making moment? Is it a coordination meeting? Is it a motivation meeting? And try and think about types of meetings. Because what's happened is we've all plugged into this endless Zooming and Microsoft Teaming and 50 people in a meeting. Try and work out hard about that. See, let me say this last thing about this, is that all organizations, they're basically a system. So sort of like McDonald's, it's a system. And the job of a leader is to not manage only the product and the finances and the people, but it's understanding the system, how it actually works, how we make the burgers. And so make sure you're a systems architect. I'm not sure about IT, although that's included, but make sure you're a systems architect and that the system you're running is delivering the value you intend. And that's this point I keep making. Make sure you're getting the feedback from the value you're trying to create.
That's really good. I got so much from that, just that we don't get bogged down in all these things. So Nick, have you got some final thoughts before we zoom out, to use that analogy?
Yeah, look, I mean, we will see each other on the other side, whatever that means. The difficult thing, as I said at the beginning, is that I can't see the end yet, because I don't think we don't understand the beginning yet. I think I really don't spend time worrying about, are we going to find a vaccine and how long will this go on for, and so on and so on. There are experts who don't know, and my chances of having, all the sort of social media chatter, I ignore all of that. What I'm focused on is what I'm going to do today and tomorrow. And the psychological thing that's carried me through is this is a reality, and this day is never coming back. So let me make the most of this day. And that's a huge motivational question for me. Because at one time, I'm a big traveler, as you know, Eleanor. I'm always traveling around the world. I had big plans of, my story with Shell. I was just about to go and do all of that when the rainstorm came. And I am a traveler, and that's been denied me now. But I'm traveling in other ways. I'm reaching out to old friends. I'm making new friendships. I'm finding new sources of information, and I'm changing my core work. Now, what more is life than that? So make the best of this time and realize, although it's frustrating, we ain't going to Kansas, Toto. This is where we are. And grab it, seize the wind. Carpe diem. Because today is not happening again. And if you wait and wait and wait, there's once a farmer once told me a story about this farmer who went to him and said, it's an apocryphal story, what are you going to plant this year? And the farmer said, oh, I don't know. He said, are you going to plant millies? He said, oh, I don't know. Sunflowers, or peanuts, potatoes? No, he said, I'm going to wait and see. In farming, you can't wait and see. You have to plant. And so get planting. I'm really excited. Just let me end and thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to see all of you guys, but I have to say that the variety of companies on the list is just fantastic. And if you as a group, you will learn as easily as much from each other as you will from anyone else. And so, especially because it looks like most of you are not in the same businesses. I formed a group that ran for 23 years. And we met once a month for 23 years. And what we realized is how much we learn from each other by really openly sharing, not only the bad news, but ideas, brainstorm with each other and bring the issues to each other. I promise you, in this group of whatever the number is, 20 people, every answer to every bloody problem is in the group. It's just a question of giving. Make sure you give more than you take. South Africans love taking. We're so uncertain. We just want to take. Give. And if you guys give to each other, you are unstoppable, because every problem can be solved in this group, just looking at the companies. So I really wish you well, and lots of excitement. Don't lose the idea that, I'm a struggle child. I came from the 80s when it looked absolutely hopeless. I remember Newsweek had an article in it about South Africa. It said, South Africa is cursed with the empty promise of a foregone conclusion. It was such delicious English. The empty promise of a foregone conclusion. We said, footsack, and we changed this place. Now, your generation have a different change job than mine, although the politics are still with us, but change this place. And if you guys make a significant change and we add it all up, we'll move the cheese. So seize it as the opportunity it is. Don't waste the revolution.
Nick, so I've got a final question, because I know you love talking about this, and in every engagement that we've had, you've always been, you got me fired up. So what is the message of optimism for us in South Africa in these times? How do we remain optimistic in our businesses?
That's why I was mentioning the 80s, when it all looked doom and gloom. It all looked impossible. There was no way we were going to remove this government, but we did. I remember in the mid-Zuma years, there was no way we were going to get rid of Zuma, but we did. So South Africa has a kind of personal, individual, and communal resilience. And we are a stuff up because we wait until defeat and then we get busy. So, don't waste the crisis. And I think we've taken a structural hit. I mean, it's like the tsunami's coming through us, and maybe it will go out again and we'll see what's left. But there will be an economy, there will be opportunities, there will be customers, but it's going to be Germany 1948. We're going to have to recover the economy. And this time we're going to have to do what my generation failed to do. We brought political freedom. We now need economic justice and economic inclusion, because we've added probably about 10 million people to the dependency category. And so we have to create an inclusive society. And let me end this, Eleanor. I always sound like Billy Graham. Let me just say, South Africans have to figure out they need each other. And currently, each one runs their little piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's a terrible mistake. So this program allows you to make deep friendships. The calls, I've been making calls to my old chommies from 30, 40 years ago, and nothing's changed. We're the same people. We went through these amazing business experiences, learning or political experiences. That's what gives a country character. And South Africa has enough character. It just needs more capability.
Awesome. That's really great. We have the character, we just need more capability. That's really great. So next, thank you so much for the time.
It's a pleasure,
everyone that
Eleanor.
logged on, thank you very much for making the time to attend the session. If nothing else, we can walk out of the session knowing that we can still run our businesses. There is light at the end of the end of a tunnel. Our ecosystem may have changed, but we are entrepreneurs and we shape the environment. So thanks very much. Thank you, Nick. I really, really do appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Lovely to see you, Eleanor. Keep that smile.
Nice to see you, Nick. Yeah,
All
thanks,
the best.
Nick. Chat
All right.
soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Shoot the lights out.